Hello, I'm Martin Harris, and I am from Idaho, Louisville, Idaho, which is a very small town. My father was born there. His name was Galen Harris, and his father was Alfred Harris. His father was Russell King Harris. His father was Martin Harris Jr., and his father was Martin Harris, who is a somewhat famous historical figure in Mormon church history, history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He was a friend of Joseph Smith, who's the first prophet and first president of that church, and financed the first publication of the Book of Mormon. My family lived in Idaho most of my life, and in my early adulthood, my wife and I lived there, and went through life making decisions, weighing options, making financial decisions and personal decisions and family decisions, and occasionally taking these things to the Lord and having a discussion with the Lord and trying to make decisions that He would be pleased with in a direction that He wanted us to go in. But for the most part, just felt like we were plodding along on a regular old track, doing the things we were hoping were right. And then we met Doc Cleland in eastern Wyoming, and suddenly all of these little decisions started to make sense and gave us a much broader picture of the Lord's hand in our lives. We left Idaho in 2008. I started looking for work in late 2007, which is something I'd never looked outside of Idaho Falls. I'd always looked for jobs within the reach of my car, within an hour's drive, and suddenly felt a stirring in 2007 that I should broaden that horizon. So I started looking for work in areas that I was willing to live, those areas being areas where the weather gets cold enough in the winter that the bugs die. I'm not comfortable with bugs that live year-round. So we looked in Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, some areas of Colorado, and the job offering in Douglas, Wyoming responded to my resume and asked if we would come out for an interview. And so I went to the map online and searched for Douglas, Wyoming, and I was looking for landmarks, things that I would recognize. Where is Douglas, Wyoming? And so I zoomed out on the map and didn't see anything I recognized, and I zoomed out and zoomed out. About 6 times I finally saw Cheyenne, and my middle school geography halfway kicked in, and I said, I think I know where Cheyenne is. Zoom out, there's Denver. Okay, I've been to Denver. Holy cow, this is really far away. I had a cousin go to school in South Dakota School of the Mines, and I remember clearly thinking at the time, well, we'll never see him again. He's on the other side of the planet. That's really far away. And here we are in Douglas, Wyoming. It's 2 hours from this school. So we moved very, very far away. My wife did not want to move. I felt the opportunity was right, felt the Spirit was prompting us in that direction. The Lord was behind us. My wife was comfortable in Idaho Falls. All of her family roots were there. All of mine are there. Again, I have generations and generations of family in Louisville, Idaho. Why leave? So I took the matter to the Lord under very serious prayer and received an answer that was so strong I couldn't deny it. And my wife said, okay, I don't have that same answer, but I will trust yours. And so we packed up and we moved to Douglas, Wyoming, a little town of about 6,000 people. And when we got there, we thought, this is completely crazy. There's nobody here. There's nobody here we know. This is way out of our element. The church is very small. Our little church group is very small. And we settled in as best we could in this new environment and lived there comfortably. Kids got into school. I got good at what I did at work, and everything was great. And I was asked to be the young men's leader in our church group, which meant that on Wednesday nights, I was responsible for teaching the young men skills, scouting skills, knots and lighting fires without matches, and emergency shelters, as well as spiritual things and how to be a good husband, what to do as a boyfriend, how to dance, things like this, practical things that young men need to know on Wednesday nights from 7 to about 8:30. It was on one of these Wednesday nights when this strangely dressed man showed up in our church parking lot with a hand cart. I was familiar with the concept of a hand cart. We're on the Mormon Trail. It's about a mile from where we live. And so I was familiar with what a hand cart looked like, but I had never seen a man dressed in period accurate clothing show up unannounced out of nowhere asking if he could sleep on our lawn at the church. He was asking for permission from the bishop, who's the leader of the church there. So he got the bishop's phone number, called him, got permission to sleep on the lawn, and we got speaking, he and I, a little bit, and I shared my heritage, and he shared with what he was doing, and things started to click, and we started to see that a whole bunch of what would be considered coincidental decisions and circumstances were not coincidental, that there was a plan. And at some point in that evening, it was getting dark, Doc asked if I would write my testimony in his Book of Mormon. He had a Book of Mormon he was carrying on the trail. He asked if I'd write my testimony in there. And I was a little bit taken back. I was a little bit nervous about it. This isn't something that happens to me. You know, it's not a parlor trick. This isn't something we go to parties and people, you know, ask me to sign their Books of Mormon or whatever. Doc asked a very unique request, and I wasn't quite sure how to respond, and I put it off for a little bit, and I took care of the youth, and it's running through my head, what am I going to write in this thing? I've read it several times. You know, I have a testimony of it, but what do I write in another person's Book of Mormon that is of any significance at all? Surely he is on this trek. He knows more of this book than I do. His testimony has got to be greater than mine. What am I supposed to do? What is my role here? And we sat in the lobby of that church, and I opened this Book of Mormon and stared at a blank page, and stared at a blank page, and just sat and was overwhelmed with the enormity of the request. I didn't know what to write. And after sitting there for a while, a sentence came to me. A couple of words came. And I wrote them. And then another sentence came. And that I couldn't think past one sentence or one group of words at a time. I had to write it. Before any more words would come. So I wrote and waited, and then wrote some more and waited, and I looked across the room, and I think Doc was asleep at that, or close to it at that time. He had had a very, very long day, very long series of days, of course. But I'm writing this testimony in this back of this Book of Mormon. And I finished, and I wrote my lineage in there, so that there would be a reference point for who, you know, ascribed this in his book. And I gave it back to him, and it was very late at that time. It was 10-something o'clock, and we were way past our closing time for our meeting. And I went home, and Doc went on his way. And he came back to Douglas that winter and brought this Book of Mormon with him. And he said, "Do you remember when you wrote your testimony in my Book of Mormon?" And I said, "Yeah, I remember." And he goes, "Do you know what it says?" And I didn't. I couldn't have told you 2 words in a row in that whole thing. And he read it to me, and it was like I was hearing it for the first time. It struck me so deeply that I just sat and wept, along with the rest of my family. I can tell you that those words aren't mine. I am very pleased to have been the conduit for them. Very honored. But I believe those are the words of my 3rd great-grandfather, who actually held the golden plates, felt the weight of them, turned the pages, saw the characters, took those characters to Charles Anthon, and received the certificate that he then tore up. This was my grandfather. And that's his testimony.